What would the world look like if people felt like they mattered? Welcome to the Lead with Love podcast, exploring what it means to lead with love in business and life. I'm your host, Jada Selner, and in this show, I'll share meaningful conversations to help you, the creative, the entrepreneur, the world changer, reach more people, go after your dreams, and serve your community with love. I appreciate you joining me. Now let's get cozy and start today's episode. Are you ready to step into your next level of leadership? If you want an honest conversation about how to trust yourself as a leader, learning how to handle rejection and setbacks, and also serving your community authentically, then this episode is for you. So you're listening to episode 121 of the Lead with Love podcast. And in today's conversation, I get cozy with Pamela Slim, and she is the author of 2 best-selling books, Escape from Cubicle Nation, which is a movement designed for corporate employees who wanted to make the shift to entrepreneur, and also her book, Body of Work, Finding the Thread That Ties Your Story Together. And this book gives a fresh perspective on the skills required to thrive in the new world of work. And she also talks about in this episode today a 3rd book that is in the making. So you definitely want to tune in. So a little bit about Pamela Slim. Pamela Slim is a small business coach who advises very large companies on how to understand and connect with small business owners today. And Pam's insight is drawn from her decades of coaching, as well as inside her own small business learning laboratory on Main Street in Mesa, Arizona. So we definitely talk about the challenges of brick and mortar businesses. And this is where she really talks every day, in the trenches with entrepreneurs from every walk of life, from side hustlers to companies in high scaling mode. And Pam is frequently quoted as a business expert in press such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. So she's definitely someone you want to pay attention to. So today, some things that we talk about are the perspective on leadership Pam gained from her time in the corporate world, including why leadership is a choice. What motivated Pam to journey from her corporate job to entrepreneur, and tips she has for others looking to make that leap. We also go into the underbelly of entrepreneurship that nobody wants to talk about, and how she also handles building communities and what she's learned over the years, and how she's practicing that in her local face-to-face community, which I think is so beautiful. And I think you'll get some amazing takeaways just from that conversation alone. She'll also share her takeaways from her successfully completing a crowdfunding campaign and advice she would give to others looking to do the same. We also talk about, why you shouldn't play small or hesitate to share your opinions, which I think is such a good reminder, especially for me. I tend to want to be the peacemaker and all about harmony, and, sometimes being opinionated kind of disrupts that. But if we want to change the world and disrupt the status quo, then we actually have to share what we really think and believe and stand for. So if you want full show notes from this episode, go over to jadaselner.com/121. That's 121. And if you're ready to feel more flow, more freedom, and more fun in building a sustainable business without the burnout, then I would love for you to go over to loveovermetrics.com, learn all about the Love Over Metrics incubator, and apply. I would love to learn more about your vision, your dreams, and anything anything that might be holding you back from taking that next level leap in your business growth and creating more momentum. So now I would love to dive into today's conversation. I'm so excited to talk with you today, Pam.
I'm so happy to be here.
So I have to, share, I always like to share how I first, learn about people, meet people. And I remember the first opportunity that I got to actually meet you in person was at World Domination Summit in 2014. And I know we have a mutual friend, Jonathan Fields. And I remember us all gathering, I think it was a meal in a random food court. And then we were walking around the neighborhood. And you just bring so much joy and love into just you showing up and shining in the world. So I just wanted to reflect that to you.
Oh, thank you. What a lovely connection. And the fact that it was Jonathan is really special to me. I love him so dearly.
Yeah. So I'm excited to, get to learn a little bit more about you and what you're building today. I know one of the big pieces, I think a lot of people have said a term that you've coined in like building that body of work. So I'm excited to dive into that a little bit today. But I love to ask this question. It's a big one, but I feel like this is a place that you lead from. But I'm curious what leading with love means to you and how you put that into practice in your business.
Yeah, I love that you lead with that and you ask that because it is a really super important thing to me. And when I think about leadership, it's interesting. There's so many layers. I think coming from a lot of my background is in training and development and kind of, leadership development, looking in organizations. And then when I shifted into entrepreneurship, sometimes we don't tend to use that same word, right, to be a leader because it feels like it's like a big company word or, you have to be like a huge leader of a movement. But really the way I see it is we really are each individually leaders in our life. And I always tell my clients, my job is to support and strengthen the leadership capacity that they have in their business, right? Where they can be better, stronger, and more capable in the work that they're doing. So there's a part of work which I really love and I just dork out about. I did this morning. I went to the orthodontist because our son's getting braces today. Very exciting, monumental thing in our household. And I walked in and I was like, oh my God, this place is amazing. Like it's physically beautiful. Their operations were incredible. Like every single part of the business flowed so well that just made my Virgo self excited, right? Like from a business side. And so there's this side where you see choices that you make around leadership that have to do with how you support and structure, right, your business and how you design operations and how you manage finances and all these kind of businessy things, right? Yeah. The piece of it that it is a choice in terms of how we really step in to how we lead and why we lead is a choice around values. And one thing I've learned from being, 25 years of being an executive coach and coach in some form is that we really are all wired very differently. And I've just really learned that because I lead a certain way doesn't mean that everybody has to lead from that perspective. But for me, in my VIA character strengths, if you've ever done that assessment,
Yes.
Right? Love is actually one of my top 5. In fact, it might even be the number 1. And so what that means a lot when I look at practically this balance between being super dorkily excited by, the nuts and bolts of business, but then seeing how it is that it shows up in the work is in recognizing that ultimately, my job is to make my clients feel surrounded and supported with love, to feel anchored in the work that they're doing, knowing that I really do, as a human being, love them unconditionally. I want the best for them. I want them to feel fully supported. I want them to feel like they have an ally in terms of walking through any kinds of scary parts of the business. And to also know that there's no shame in whatever kind of experience that they've had in business or as is often the case, as we're working on making shifts and changes in maybe making their business better, or stronger. And it's this place, it's funny, I notice sometimes it's not with everybody because, again, I respect that everybody comes from a different place, but it is very common that I'll sign off my coaching calls with, I love you. Certain people, right? I've worked with them for a long time, and there is that feeling I love you. I love you as a human. I'm excited by what you're doing. And the part of it, I think that's a nuance, is that when you do have that kind of function that you see, right? Primarily, I'm always looking for how to make that person feel better, stronger, more healthy. We have our own relationship as coach and client, which is very important, right? To be respectful of that boundary and to know sometimes, right? Not every single engagement always works out perfectly. Thankfully, I've had, not many cases, but there's been certain cases, right? You get into it and for whatever reason, it's really not the right fit. And so that can happen. All those kind of business experiences and really straight talk and, speaking truth and dealing with fear that really are laying on top of this fundamental foundation, right, in the earth of love, and knowing that no matter what happens, even if we decide that we're not going to work together, I only want good for you. So that to me is where, because it is such a strong value for me, and it's I would say kind of my spiritual foundation is based on that, on really anchoring ourselves in connection with the earth, on love for each other, right? Fellowship. And then using that as a foundation for doing really sometimes difficult work together.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And it just feels like this mama bear, just hug and love and compassion and empathy. And I just love the way that you explain that. And that's amazing that love is one of your top VIA strengths. So I'm curious, I know you talked about moving from corporate to executive coaching, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you're working on today, but I'm just curious about what was the spark for you in making that leap from corporate to, hey, I'm going to do my own thing?
Yeah, well, it was back in 1996, and I lived in the Bay Area, and I had been working for a large financial services company at Barclays Global Investors. And it's funny because I ended up, years later starting the Escape from Cubicle Nation blog and later writing the book. So people can assume that I hated corporate and I had a really terrible experience. Actually, I loved it. I love my cube. I love my little Post-it notes, my sharp number 2 pencils. It was awesome. I had amazing bosses, and I learned so much in the experience. It was just this rich and, deep environment. And so for me, I had been simultaneously working full time, and then during the day, and then in the evenings, I was a volunteer executive director for Omalu Capoeira Group, which Capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art. And so I basically worked, probably 80 to 100 hours a week. I literally would leave at 5, hop the train, lose the pearls and the nylons, jump into my capoeira gear, and sometimes do 3 classes in a row, right, that I was taking or teaching. At one point, I was doing 17 classes a week. In addition to that, I was doing all the admin, marketing, right, putting up flyers, writing grants, doing, performances and productions. So it was a pretty much, as I said, in body of work, full color, full contact type of life. And so I turned 30, and we had a merger and acquisition. A couple of my amazing bosses, had moved on. And I just had that moment where I'm I just know I'm not happy. I got pneumonia too. And something had to change, or just other things going on personally. And so I actually quit with no plan. Which I always say I don't recommend, right? No side hustle going, right? I hadn't even coined that term. And so, but it just felt like the right thing. And initially I was looking for other jobs. So I fully considered that I'd be working for somebody else. I never considered myself to be entrepreneurial. And it wasn't until a few months after that I just needed to get some income. I went to work as a contractor consultant for my old boss who had moved to Hewlett Packard. And I I really did have like this revelatory ceiling opened, light beam on my forehead where I was like, oh my gosh, like running a nonprofit for 11 years, even though I was a volunteer executive director, is still entrepreneurial experience.
Yes.
And I've never looked back, and it's been 22 years.
Wow. And I know something that you mentioned in body of work, there's these ebbs and flows, whether you're entrepreneur or intrapreneur or working, and I've had some clients recently who, have gone on the entrepreneurial path, but then also exploring, maybe I need a little bit more cash flow from, going back into working for a company while building, their heart project on the side through that entrepreneurial path. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are. I know there's some shame that can come up of feeling like you're going backwards. And I know that you talk about the thread that really ties the whole story together. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are for people who are kind of straddling two worlds of building their own thing and also feeling like I might need to go back to create some more revenue and go back into the corporate space to survive.
One of the reasons I wrote Body of Work is because I actually was becoming quite dismayed with the either or type of thinking that I was seeing in the space. When I started in 2005 at Escape from Cubicle Nation, it was a different time. There weren't so many people who were talking about quitting your job to start a business. And so what I noticed over about a decade of, more and more people talking about it is there became this whole feeling that the only way that you're creative and free is if you work for yourself. And basically doing, I don't want to be, in shackles and, hey, I'm the first person to be like making jokes about the man, and all of that stuff. But really, when you think about it, there's a couple dimensions to it, right? One is like, what is so special about a particular work mode? There's going to be challenges in many situations. So you have people who work for universities or nonprofits or who work for entrepreneurial organizations. They can be small companies that are led by entrepreneurs, but those people end up hiring employees, right? Yeah. So there's something really just weird about saying that the only way you can be creative and free is by working for yourself. Like tell that to a NASA scientist, or tell that to my brother and sister-in-law who are university professors who make a huge difference, in environmental geology and have a huge impact on students that they work with, right, et cetera. And so part of it is, I think, a very limited view. And the other thing, having done this startup work for so long, it is no joke. You know that. Yes, it is no joke. It is hard. And for some people, for a whole variety of reasons, it can be actually, in certain cases, like a really bad idea. Right? Not bad that they made the choice, but they might get into it and realize, wow, I'm putting myself in huge financial struggle, or I really don't have the risk tolerance and my, blood pressure is going through the roof and I'm stressed out and my marriage is strained or whatever. The other piece of it, I think, is a little bit more of an intersectional, analysis of looking at how it is that we talk about things. I could, go on forever of, folks who might say, yeah, college is not important at all, like skip college.
Right.
And in many cases, when you look at it from an intersectional perspective, like actually, I have, my kids are Navajo and Anglo because my husband's Navajo, actually when you're a Native American kid, it actually does make a big difference whether you go to college or not. There are certain kinds of barriers and biases that certain folks can face that's going to be different than, for my brother. Right, yes. Who ended up, ironically, being a university professor. But, so there's an intersectional part of it that I think is important for us to look at, where we just say that, this is the only way to be. And it may not take into consideration that, for very good reasons, sometimes people have a different situation where they're choosing to work for somebody else, for a very good reason. So that was like, I ended up just being annoyed, and I would just try to coach my clients and say, there is nothing wrong at all. We're all self-employed, ultimately, like nothing is ever really guaranteed. So when you make a choice, that's part of actually having this like new world of work approach to how you're looking at your work, is where you're creative and you're resourceful and you look for opportunities when they come up, and you really tune in and you notice what are your strengths and what do you need at a given time. It really is about creating a path that works for you you and not worrying about, frankly, like having looked under the hood, as probably you have, right, to a lot of businesses that appear to be fantastic on Instagram, like a lot of them are hot messes, right? Either like total disastrous teams or financially businesses that are making, tons of money, but very little profit.
Absolutely. What would you say is like the underbelly of entrepreneurship that no one talks about?
I think the underbelly is you constantly need to be like aware and designing and pushing in a number of different areas in order to have this well-rounded view of how you're looking at your business. It's never static, right? So there can be like energy that you have when you're starting a business where a lot of it is about, if you're in a corporate job, like leaving and figuring that whole part out and getting your first customers, right? As soon as you get through that, any stage of business that you're in, there's always going to be these new dimensions. You start to grow, you need to start to look at operations and hiring and scaling and, intellectual property and legal considerations. One of my good friends, Greg Hartle, was saying that I was doing fundraising when I first opened our learning lab here. And he was, kind of coaching me a little bit about making asks, right? Sometimes going and pitching and making asks. And it was like, oh yeah, it feels a little bit uncomfortable to be doing this for, whatever, a $10,000 ask or something. And he's like, you know what? You're always going to be making an ask. Like first it's 10,000, then it'll be 100, then it'll be 1 million, then it'll be 10 million. Like if you're deciding to grow and scale your business, you never really settle and it never necessarily gets easy. It's actually one of those paradoxes where that's part of what makes it amazing and part of why I love it, because you're constantly learning and growing.
Yes.
But to me, the underbelly, like really where I get on my soapbox and get super riled up, as my kids will tell you, is where it is painted in a very singular way, right? That like either this is the right way to do it and there's one system, which I don't agree. I love operations. I love learning, right? Love that. But where it's something that's marketed as being kind of this bulletproof solution, that usually sets people up to be very passive and to be looking for, right, kind of an empire guru to be giving them direction about what to do. And that's not helpful, right, over time. You can make a lot of money. I always say, right, when you have a business idea and for some reason, like it takes off and it, goes viral and you have a really great experience, often like we consider ourselves geniuses, like that was me. Like I was immediately making more money as a consultant than I made as an employee. And that's pretty good, right? It was also 1996 in the Bay Area, super high growth area, working in tech with a very strong skill set, right? And I know how to sell and I know how to build relationships. So it really worked well. If I had launched in 1999, right, I would have considered myself a total failure by probably doing the exact same set of steps, right?
Yes.
Because we don't really consider everything that's involved. So it's, really looking at it where it's this singular approach, right? There's some quick and easy decision, reason for doing it. And there's, one system and way of working can get people in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
And there's a lot of folks, unfortunately, who prey on the desire that people have to forego difficult work.
Yes, I love that. And I something, my friend who I referred to work with you, Michelle, the founder of The Practice, one of the themes that she talked about, I actually take her movement class on Monday evenings, and she talked about self-authority and how we give our power away to others, to the blueprint, to the plan, to like, just tell me what to do. And what you're saying is like to get in the driver's seat of your business, and actually like those asks will never stop. And I just think that's so powerful, a reminder of it's not just a one and done. There's no more work to do and let's just kind of hang out at a beach and not have a business to take care of. I really, really, really love that piece. I'm also curious for you if there is a specific time that you remember where you experienced rejection, and how did you handle that?
Oh, how long do we have?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Well, there's a kind of a fun example. I think my dad passed away a few weeks ago. So it was just, remembering many things in these last couple of weeks in the times we had. But I had done early after I started Escape from Cubicle Nation, I started writing a couple of articles like for a publication for kind of a larger site that also serves small business owners. So I was really excited about it. And, here I've been blogging and getting a little bit of, visibility and feeling like really good. And so I wrote the articles and I was really proud of them and sent them off. And then I guess I had an internal editor that was working on them. And basically I was friends with the guy who was the founder of the site, but he kind of came back and was sort of almost embarrassed to give me the feedback, and essentially handed back the equivalent of red pen everywhere, and these notes from the editor. And it was this is, basically saying it's kind of poorly written. She uses too many exclamation points. There's all this stuff, where it's just that yucky feeling, where I had felt kind of full of myself and I was making great progress. And because I never considered that I was actually going to end up being a writer. I'm as shocked as anybody else. Mm-hmm. As much as I loved English, I just, didn't really see that coming. But it was very deflating. I felt embarrassed. I felt, just kind of humiliated. And so at the same time, I remember in college I had taken a class on writing, and she just kept saying that it's all about the revisions, right? It's never about the first draft. It's always about the revisions. And so I took it, I bit the bullet. I sent an email to my dad and my sister, because my dad's a photojournalist and my sister is a writer and editor. And I forwarded on. We always love to lick our wounds with each other, right? So we all commiserated and kind of silently, well, not so silently, in our email thread, we cursed, right? The person giving the feedback, but there was always truth in that. There was truth that I learned as a writer that was very helpful for me developmentally. And then fast forward, probably was about a year and a half later, and it was after my book came out. So I got a book deal with Penguin Portfolio and actually did a piece in the New York Times. So I was on the opinion piece, in the physical New York Times, which was my dad's probably greatest glory as a dad, because he loves the New York Times. It was an opinion piece that I wrote, which is kind of amazing, right? And a bit of an esteemed thing in the world of writing. And so almost simultaneously, as soon as the piece came out, my dad and my sister both sent different emails to me with, in the subject line, congratulations, with 20 exclamation points.
Oh, I love that.
Because there never are too many exclamation points, right?
Thank you for sharing that. I had an opportunity. You actually came to, I can't remember if it was Berkeley or Oakland, but you started a tour around building community. And I'm curious, what was the big vision behind that project, and what worked, what didn't work, and what kind of unfolded from that building community tour that you did?
Oh, yeah. You were in the first one.
Yes.
That we did it at Mothership Hacker Moms. Isn't that what it's called? I think in Berkeley. Yeah. It's so, you're part of the legendary crew, because that was the very first one. Yeah, it was a community tour. So I had this revelation sitting on my sister's patio. She moved up to Northern California, right on a beautiful lake. So I was sitting there, in the summer and thinking about kind of what was next. And I reflected that one of my greatest joys in the world is building community. My degree in college was actually community development, and I've done it always through my work, even doing building virtual community. And I realized that for my next book that I really wanted to be working in this area. And I also realized that I definitely had a point of view about an approach to building community that I decided to do something really different. I called it the Unbook Tour, with a little wink to my friend Scott Stratton, who's written Unmarketing and Unselling, is that I wanted to actually take a rough model, which is what I shared, right? With these are the different things that I've learned over time about building community, and really test it and try it with entrepreneurs around the country. I went to 25 different cities, 24 in the US, and I went to Vancouver in Canada, and really noticed what were the things that people were relating to, and what did they respond to, and where were the gaps, so that instead of just creating all my own book kind of in a vacuum, I could really get input from them. And it was so invaluable. So many things happened through that experience. I tried to make it a very meta experience where I actually used all of the community building tools that I was teaching as I was running the tour. So in each place, I connected with people that I knew. I tried to get it hosted by a local organization. If I didn't know somebody, I really tried the things I recommend for how it is that you quickly can kind of build rapport, and begin begin to build connection with somebody around shared values and so forth. So that at first was really that idea of kind of shaping ideas for the book and getting input. I had no idea that it would end up having me open up a brick and mortar learning laboratory in Mesa, Arizona, because one of the other things that I asked, and I don't think I asked it maybe in the very first one, but shortly thereafter, I began to ask everybody in the group who there had ever seen a Native American speaker at a business conference that was presenting as an expert on a business topic, not as like a cultural educator, right, or entertainment, right, or giving a blessing, but somebody who was a business presenter. And out of the 25 cities and 800 or something people on the tour, only 7 people had ever seen a Native American business presenter. And this was really significant to me because it's not because they don't exist. It was recognizing how little visibility that they had. And, putting an analysis lens on it, there's one of the pillars of white supremacy is invisibility, especially when you start to look at Native populations, right? Of kind of many people think like, oh, do they even exist now? Or they have a very skewed view about what life is like, within Native American culture. And obviously there are all kinds of different tribes, all kinds of different people, right, within the tribes. But because my husband had been a business owner, and I would go to conferences that were filled with all these amazing Native presenters, that was one of the things that we really talked about a lot when I got home is as the parents of Native children and being an auntie and uncle, right, for our extended nieces and nephews, then what were we doing in order to be really changing that narrative and doing specific things to have a welcoming place where not only Native American entrepreneurs, but also a lot of other folks of color or folks who had felt, kind of marginalized could come and grow and develop. So that, didn't see that one coming. Yeah. That ended up totally being this unexpected, journey. And what's interesting, I'm still working on the idea for the book. What I realized through the experience is actually the whole lived journey starting from that tour is all part, I think, of what it is that's going to be wrapping into the book. And I just needed to play it out longer in order to know exactly what it is that I want to say about it. So who knows, cross my fingers, hopefully towards the end of the year is where I'll really finalize the proposal and then end up pitching it. My publisher and I have gone kind of back and forth on it. And, I've just really realized that it's about the journey and it's about really making the connection, living the experience, and then writing about it.
Yes. And I do think that I'm just getting chills from it, that there's this stage of the experimentation of what you're talking about, but there's another context added in there of representation. That's a really big word for me right now, and having people of color be able to be more visible. I just don't think that story could have existed without the time and you incubating and actually launching your brick and mortar business. So I'd love to hear more now that is this your first time owning an actual brick and mortar business?
It is. I've been in an outside office before, but not having it be. Yeah, it's it literally is on Main Street in Mesa, Arizona. So it's a we call it a learning laboratory, and it's funny. When I know what will end up being a chapter in the book is now called Listen First, which is because when we first came here, I knew, and again, my background in college was in community development, and it was really from a very specific perspective of not being the equivalent of USAID, right? That blazes into somewhere and says, either here's a whole drop of supplies, or this is the project that we're going to do. Very patriarchal, frankly, very colonial, right? That really it's looking at grassroots economic development that's driven by local community leaders. And so that's always been the framework that I've really resonated with and that I like to work in. And so we wanted to model that based on what we did here and spend time just listening, getting to know neighbors, talking to people. It's funny, it's the equivalent of people coming through your website. Like
Right.
we have them come through the front door. And it's really cool. Like, people will walk through the front door and you begin to hear these different stories. And I know for us, because we definitely had a lens of wanting to make sure that we were engaging folks of color, that we would ask questions like, who's here on Main Street, who's not here, and why aren't they here? And began to really like do some of this, connection, and created a place fundamentally that like physically is beautiful. My husband is, as I said, Navajo. He's a traditional healer. He does ceremony, he does wellness, and is an amazing partner in this. And that, everything about the way that he approaches things in spaces is from a very sacred perspective, right? A very thoughtful perspective. And so, it's not just a physical space. It's really, how do you greet people when they come in the door? What's the feeling that you want to have in here? How can you be looking at this whole person that's coming in and listening to whatever part of the story that they want to share?
Yes.
Having a place where people can bring their kids. Because, for a lot of folks, they may not necessarily have resources, right, for daycare, or, you and I were just talking before, right, about,
Yes.
Being parents and juggling the whole thing. And sometimes, again, in certain structures of business, like one could feel kind of embarrassed or ashamed, right, like kind of like trying to quiet down, right, their kid, or like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, I had to bring my kid with me. Versus for us, we're like, rock on, here's art supplies, we have a whole whiteboard wall, like you are welcome. We want you to be here and to watch your parents engaging in the world and in their business.
It's a physical embodiment of love.
That's it.
Talking about and pouring in that attention to detail and care and welcoming. I'm curious, you mentioned one of the questions was like looking around who's here and then who's not here. Why are they not here? Was there any answers that were surprising to that last question, or of why they're not here?
I wouldn't necessarily say surprising. I would say difficult, like sometimes straight racism.
Yeah.
A lot of lack of representation, right? Like just sometimes being in a physical space, it's a conversation I've had with many folks of color, right? That often, I live in one of the most conservative cities in America, and very unfortunately, we've had a lot of national press, right, about police brutality and a number of things here in Mesa. Like for many people, there can be a physical concern of safety. And many folks will say, right, like before I really go and walk my way through a neighborhood, like I kind of want to scan and notice, is there anybody here that looks like me? Am I safe here? Do I have any allies? That's a real thing. And so, I think about those kinds of things when both we're talking about, how do we specifically address that? How can we address it from the point of where somebody, makes it here and walks through the door so they really feel welcome, but also in terms of how it is that we are providing advice and guidance. And when I say we, from this perspective, I'm talking about being a white, right, business coach, female business coach, where sometimes we have this, generic advice. Oh, hey, you have this business. Why don't you just go knock on doors or, walk into a store and introduce yourself? That is not always a safe experience for everybody. And when we don't acknowledge that, then that's sometimes where the message that I've heard from folks that I've talked to about that, from folks of color or, differently abled or right, kind of a whole range of things, can just mean, this person doesn't get me. This person has no idea what my experience is. And therefore, this kind of service is not really relevant for me.
Yeah. I'm curious for you, you did the community tour and the intention was to build, the next body of work around this book. And then the brick and mortar idea came. Did you have any fears or hesitations in moving forward when that seed was planted?
I will say that I have anybody who wants to look inside my life or business, many, many areas where I am not strong. One area that borders foolhardiness and total courage is my tolerance for risk. So I had no fear. I got super excited. I saw the space, I wanted it. And I just got the vision, like, I know this is it. I know this is what it is that I need to do. And I actually, in 24 hours, put together an Indiegogo campaign. I don't know if you know Clay Hebert.
Yes,
he's a good friend of mine. Okay, I love Clay so much. One of the smartest people in the world. And for those listening, it's Hebert, a little French pronunciation.
Yes.
But he's done tons of work around crowdfunding. So, I was like, hey, Clay, heads up, FYI, like, here's my campaign I'm gonna launch. And within like 5 minutes, he emails, he's like, do not hit publish without talking to me. Like, apparently I just totally screwed the whole thing up. So he helped me, God bless him. And, I kind of fixed everything. But literally, like, within 48 hours, I had an Indiegogo campaign. We raised $40,000. I got, partners with GoDaddy and Tuft & Needle and Infusionsoft, to pitch in. And it just was one of those things when, I knew that it was right. I think I've learned through time that I actually am like one of the slowest movers in a way, right? I can be simmering and kind of, bubbling on something for a while. And then once I decide to do it, it's not just kind of pure intuition, right? And there's a big part of that, but usually it's because like other things have kind of happened inside, to learn that it's really time to do it. But I really believe in paying attention to things like that. And when I feel like the full body experience of this is right, I go for it.
I think that's so important, that full body yes. And you said like, I just know this is right. And it sounds like you had a big vision and you looked for your allies to support you and help you on this path. You didn't do it on your own. You enrolled people into the vision to support something that's bigger than yourself.
Well, it's true. And it's a perfect example, right? That if I were then to say, hey, everybody in the world, like if you have an idea, just trust your judgment, right? Do a crowdfunding campaign. It helps that for like 12 years prior, I had been building community, traveling the country, building relationships, right? Have a really large social media presence. So for me, and I, don't have tons of asks, if you will, right? Like I market my products and services and so forth, but it's not like I'm constantly asking people for stuff. So it's like in this case, everybody was really excited to contribute. And that's an example of what I mean, right? For me, in my particular situation and the relationships that I had, that was part of what I know was kind of mitigating some of that risk. It wasn't like I have, 5 people in my circle and I've never done anything like this before and crossing your fingers. That's a bit more of a risky game.
Yeah. And with the crowdfunding, what would you say, would be a piece of advice if someone was considering, doing crowdfunding campaign, hopefully giving themselves more time than 48 hours?
You think? Yes.
I know Clay has a very intentional, like you're building it before the campaign even exists, building the wait list and all of these things. But what would be like your biggest takeaway of something that would support someone who's thinking about starting their own crowdfunding campaign?
Yeah, I'm like the person, of his client avatar that's like, don't be this person. Like whatever you do the opposite of what she did. I would actually say like, learn more about it from somebody like Clay, where you can understand the different dynamics that go into a crowdfunding experience. What I learned, there's a ton of stuff around how it is that you tell the story. It's really important to look at how it is that you're actually designing the rewards so that it makes it much more compelling, for people to be contributing. And really, as you said, to be doing the engagement of the community so that you do have a great connection already. You've given a lot, right? You kind of have that good relationship established so that people are going to be excited to step in and help you. And I don't know if you've ever taken the Kolbe Index, another like kind of coaching tool. The Kolbe, it's Kolbe, and it measures your MO, your like modus operandi, how you take action. I'm very, very high on what they call quick start. So that's why I can do crazy things like that. I have a much lower score before when it comes to like implementation and follow through. So, right, there's some components that I see when I initially set that out, right, for what it is that I thought was going to be happening, right, in terms of some of the rewards, that was not exactly how it is that it turned out. So if I had to redo it with more than 48 hours preparation, like that's part that I'm like, yes, like lesson learned, right? I tried to go back as much as possible, right, and kind of have equivalent types of rewards, but it's really important to think about what it's actually going to be like to fulfill the rewards and really do like a financial analysis of it, do an analysis in terms of what it's going to take you to get it done. Because we've all seen, right, press around sometimes people being very frustrated with crowdfunded campaigns that don't deliver the way that they promise to deliver.
Yeah. What have you found has been challenging about having a brick and mortar business, and what's been really exciting about it?
I think the challenging thing is definitely taking on more expenses. So we have really, for the most part, funded ourselves. Besides the generosity of our Indiegogo campaign, we really used pretty much all of that money for, equipment, tables, paint, construction, all the things that we needed to do to get it set up. And that was by design. I wanted to make sure that it was really used for the physical assets, not just salary or, rent or something like that. So taking on the responsibility in the approach that we've taken to listen first, and not like we host lots of events that are led by folks of color primarily, where they can just use the space free of charge, which feels totally right to me. But it does definitely put a little bit of a strain, financially. We're moving in all kinds of exciting directions now of being able to do partnerships, and I'm writing grants, and there's really a lot of really cool opportunities, I think, that will be well worth it, in the long run. But that, I think, is something that, that's always a challenge, just like managing my energy. And my husband he's primarily a stay-at-home dad, and then he also does ceremony and kind of wellness coaching for people. But, primarily it's like for the income for the family, I need to generate that. So sometimes that can be a pressure. The benefits have been like innumerable. It's so amazing to be really connected to the community, to be part of a physical community, to like know people walking down the street and to hear their stories. And again, I never would have imagined, like, in being here and just engaging with people and listening, I've been involved in so many other things that I never would have been involved in. I ended up facilitating the mayor and city council strategic planning meeting. I've had all kinds of conversations with many different players down here. And as a business person that for many years did primarily a virtual coaching and consulting business, right? It was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that there was so much opportunity that was actually here locally. And just to be able to be a positive force, especially in our region, for helping to design an infrastructure and an approach so that people are included in the economic opportunities, right? So stories are told about people from neighborhoods that surround downtown, which, not surprising, right, often are folks of color who are very often completely left off of plans, not consulted, not included, never consulted about what vision that they have for what they want to see. So like to be able to identify all these amazing leaders locally and to be supportive and to work in collaboration is like joy beyond joy. It's so deeply meaningful. And we've had, I could go on forever about all the opportunities, but we've ended up also being a base. One of our dear friends, Debbie Nez Manuel, who was running a youth leadership program, that we would like host events here, and we've had all kinds of conversation. She ended up running for state senate. So now she's in a state senate campaign as a Navajo woman, which is super powerful, right? Given the dynamics of what's happening here locally, politically. And we've found that that's another part of the mix that's happening. We have the Human Rights Commission that's, doing phone banks here. I never really saw that coming, but now I'm like, duh, right. Of course it's all related, right? Of course we need to be active politically as well as doing things to support local businesses.
I love that. And I just love that you've gone from this global online reach, these books that can reach one to many, to going super local, grassroots, in your own backyard, serving your own community. And it feels like a breath of fresh air to just hear the vision and the intention and the passion behind that. So I saw this post that you posted. It was May 2011 that you wrote on your Facebook timeline, and I want to read it and just have you expand on this. So you shared, playing small doesn't have to do with scale or reach or number of people. It is believing that your opinion is not valid or important enough to share. It is important. Share it. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think we, especially in the business world, really worship the altar of scaling at all expenses in terms of thinking of growing your number of employees or growing your fame in the space that you're working. And really, when you think about impact from a grounded perspective, some of the most powerful leaders that I've ever met may not end up touching many people at all, right? In terms of the number of people that they touch or the amount of money that they generate, but the role that they play in terms of the deep, deliberate work that they do when they're really expressing their full voice and doing their work is exceptionally profound. I think about our friends, actually Debbie Nesmanuel's husband, Royce Manuel, who's from the Atum tribe, which is here in the Phoenix area. He's an artist and he does a lot of mentoring for youth. He's been mentoring our son as he's getting ready to go through his 4-day young man ceremony. And he was telling me, he said, within his tribe that they have that approach where you have, as young people are going through a stage of transition, that they have 7 women and they have 7 men who are surrounding them that are helping them to go through that experience. And, kind of uncles and aunties. And, sometimes it's a blood relative and other times it's extended people. It's that view that there are more people that are needed to help our young people walk through an experience. And looking at the work that Royce does, he's taken out Josh and some of his friends that are also going to be going through their own, young man ceremonies. And he teaches them how to choose wood and make bows and then, make the string for the bow with local plants and like all this deep teaching. And it's a specific example of where I say, like, does it matter that Royce is scaling his operations, right, to be working with hundreds of thousands of people? Or is the depth the fact that he's able to do this very deep sacred work with a circle of people who are going to end up having this legacy for many generations? And it's like you can look at that example in terms of being, a crafts person. You can look at it in terms of somebody who could be speaking up in their neighborhood and be a very powerful advocate for, a community initiative. I told the story of my dad in Body of Work in his little tiny town in Port Costa, California, in the East Bay, that he put decades of work along with my bonus mom into strengthening and supporting that community. And so that really is where, when you think about it, the most important thing is that you are connecting with and exercising your voice. And I was talking to my husband one day and I said, true leadership is acting on what it is that you know to be true. So it's like whatever it is that your truth is, that you're really actively walking in it. And that is not easy. It is not easy to be having conversations. It's not easy for me sometimes to be having conversations here downtown where my personality is more like I love everybody to get along, right? I'm kind of socialized, right? To not want to make waves and all of that, right? But what I know to be true is that we are better, happier, and healthier when we are acting in terms of justice and equity. Like it is going to be better for everybody. And so that to me, can be a scale that could be small in our local community, but then there can be times where that voice can be echoed and supported in many different places.
Yes, I love the longevity of the legacy and the depth and that ripple effect impact. It doesn't mean hundreds of thousands or millions. That's really beautiful. So I know you have the Main Street Learning Lab, and I'd love to just, hear your vision of what's happening inside the physical space that you've built.
Yeah. So as I said, we kind of have done it first, this listen first for the first couple of years. And the name of the physical space is called Keh, which is a Navajo word that means system of kinship. And it's the feeling that you have whenever Navajos first greet each other, they'll introduce themselves by clan. And when they find out how specifically they are related by clan, that feeling right there is Keh. It's that feeling where you know how you're connected and you know you belong. And so that kind of is the feeling that we know we want to infuse in everything that we're doing. What we discovered that I'm super psyched about is that really what it is, I think, that's needed in this community, and it is an idea that I think can take root, right, kind of in different ways in other communities, is to be a learning laboratory. And I am, as I said, a nerd about small business. I dork out. I love it. I'd love to learn how to, teach ways for people to have flourishing businesses. And one of the things that I found that was so frustrating in the space that I've been in is where the norm is just to sell yourself as having the ultimate bulletproof solution. And anybody knows who's been behind the scenes that the solutions don't work for everybody, right? People can have concern like, wow, I had a great launch. And in fact, we often celebrate all these things, right? About, oh man, I converted this many people and I had such a great launch. And the training and development person in me is always like, but does it actually work? Yeah. Does it help to solve the problems that are recurring? And it's much easier often to sell a solution rather than to solve a problem. I get, because I lived that experience, I need to take care of my family, right? And pay for the space here and all that we do need to sell our services and to sell it well, right? And to do our very best job to sell at scale. But I thought, how amazing would it be that we could have a space where we really are testing and trying all kinds of different approaches to core business challenges. Yes. So we did in November of 2017, we did a big survey. My friend Susan Beyer, who's an attitudinal researcher and a real expert in this area, and our friend Chris Lee, who's a web developer and CRM expert, we partner with the Cloud Software Association, which is like the trade association for all the apps, Dropbox and FreshBooks and right folks who make apps for the small business market. We had 2,000 respondents, like looking at what are attitudes that small business owners have toward obstacles, and then also what are core problems and challenges that they have. And we got great data, a lot of which, of course, will be used in the book eventually, around kind of, resources that people use in ecosystems. But then we're choosing 5 problems a year that we'll spend about 2 months at a time per problem, really digging into and doing some specific experiments to see if it really makes a difference, right, in trying these things. The design dimension that fits really with our purpose is that from the beginning, right, folks who are designing the interventions, folks who are, participating are fully representative of our communities, right? It's not that we create an entire system and then, as I say, kind of sprinkle diversity on top, right? Like, hey, Jada, would you mind coming and, right, like doing this program? Because again, people's different lived experience, points of view can be driving design decisions around the kinds of experiments that we design. And my best friend Desiree, who's an inclusion and diversity expert, an amazing person, she says, think about a design principle where you're really designing for the most marginalized person, in your community. How might you design differently your interventions from that perspective? People who might face great adversity, like maybe a trans person, right? People who might have physical challenges or limitations, so that as you're creating a solution, for example, you can be aware of that to have it be as inclusive as possible. Like that to me is where I think we can do both things.
Yes.
Because, right, where we have that and where we've developed a community that includes people from many different environments, then that's where we can really, drive something that's really unique.
That work is just, it just touches my heart. It's so beautiful and so needed and so necessary for us to look through that lens.
Yeah. And then, kind of from that, as we're learning our lessons, the idea is we really are sharing that with cloud software companies, right? With other business coaches, with other organizations. Like, I know that all of us want to be better.
Yes.
Right? It's not from lack of wanting. It's often we just don't have the time to safely explore.
That piece, the safety. I love that. So as we wrap up, I'd love to know if there's anything that we haven't talked about that you would love to share.
We covered a lot. I think we're good. What do you think?
Yes. I'm just in awe of your compassion and your love that you bring into not just your local community, but also sharing your experiences in a book that anyone could get their hands on. So please, please, please let me know when that book is out in the world, and I'll definitely link to all of your other books. And if people want to learn more about your work in Mesa, Arizona, where can they go?
PamelaSlim.com. And if you want to hear specifically about what's going on here at the Main Street Learning Lab, it's just PamelaSlim.com/KE.
Awesome. Thank you. Have an amazing, beautiful day. And I know that we'll connect soon.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your heart and attention in listening to Lead with Love. If this message, leading with love in life and business, and remembering the humans and beating hearts behind the numbers and all of that good stuff, I would love for you to take the time to leave an honest review. It would mean the world to me, and it also helps more people find out about the goodness and helping spreading more love in the world, which we really, really need. So I would really appreciate that, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.